Welcome back to the Hacking Neurodivergence podcast. In today's episode, we connect with my dear friend Darci, and we focus in on mental health, burnout, finding healing, developing a personal scorecard. As a bit of warning, I want to give you a little bit of a trigger alert. We're going to talk about some heavy concepts that come with burnout and mental health. So if that is something that you might struggle with, I want to flag that ahead of time. So this might not be the episode for you, or this might be just what you need to hear. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Darci. Welcome back to the podcast, Darci.
Thank you, Kelsey.
Last week, we heard about the first 30 years of your life, and today we're going to zero in on your time in the tech startup space. We'll cover some of the challenges you faced, lessons learned, and ultimately how you've pursued healing more recently. With that, let's get started. I would love to hear, how did you get your start in the tech space?
I was a customer of a subscription product, and they put out an email blast saying, "We're hiring and hit us up if you think you're a good fit for this role." And I thought I had a lot of expertise and transferable skills to do what they were looking for. And I just applied on a whim, looking for something different from teaching, and was fortunate enough to eventually be offered the role.
So you start in a literacy nonprofit. And we talked about that last week in detail, but now you shift into tech. Help me compare and contrast the difference in experiences that you observed in your early days of your tech career.
Yeah, I think that in tech, there was a lot of opportunity to work remotely, collaborate cross functionally across a lot of different roles, really fit in where you can get in, get experience in all sort of things. Whereas teaching was very much day in and day out, similar, not you knew what to expect. And with tech, I felt like it was a completely different experience where every day I was learning something new, getting exposure to a bunch of new things, learning new skills.
Was remote work appealing to you? This is before COVID. So was that a key selling point for you, or was that just like a detail of this tech company that you were working for?
Yeah, it was something that I had never really done before. So I will say that it was appealing in the sense of like if I didn't have to commute anymore, sure, it sounded pretty great. What I ultimately ended up learning was that I think it really enabled me to feel much safer in the work environment, much more comfortable, given that like social skills and interaction have never been something that I really flourished in. And so as you're communicating and interacting over Zoom meetings and stuff or Slack, it feels like it's a lot easier to communicate my point, take the time to think of the response, and a lot less anxiety inducing.
I love that. And so, broadly speaking, would you say it's a fair way to summarize things that you were like a business analyst? Or how would you describe your role at that subscription company?
I guess the closest equivalent would be like becoming an expert on the core product, understanding its ins and outs, and helping ultimately deliver that core product to the customers, and helping the team evolve and shift into new directions and new opportunities for not only the product, but for internally as well.
What are some of the other roles that you filled during your time in the tech space?
My roles have varied and differed, but principally around the concept of product operations. I had a brief stint in product management as well. I think that at every organization, that's meant very different things. I think it really just depended upon where I was working. Even within the organization, my role often changed and evolved. I've had several title changes, as I think that maybe you've experienced this in your career as well. If you work with really young organizations, they may have a lot of reorganization, title changes, job description changes as they really try to make sense of their organization and how it scales.
Now, when it comes to high growth startups, there can be a lot of ambiguity. where the job description isn't as clear cut as, one might like. You kind of inferred some of that in terms of doing a variety of jobs. How did you navigate ambiguity in the startup space?
I think for me, actually, in a lot of ways, I found it very beneficial because if there was something that I really excelled in, I found that oftentimes it was really celebrated to lean into that. And I think that every place that I've worked, leadership was always so keen to learn and understand what they didn't know or what they didn't think we were doing well at. And so for me, I felt like if I could find something that I excelled at, I could do it well, that there was that often it was again celebrated to lean into that. At the same time, too, that requires a lot of communication, constant check-ins with your managers to ensure that your priorities align with their priorities and that you're not getting lost in the ambiguity that or reshuffling that your efforts are being seen and that they are on track with what the expectations are.
Did you ever find that you were focused on the wrong thing? It sounds like that was a lesson that you learned. And so was there a moment where you went way off course and your manager's like, "What the heck are you doing?"
I don't know if I can think of an example, but I will say that the people who I've seen succeed most in tech are those who can target in on what the company objective might be and really pitch themselves and their efforts publicly that they have helped move the needle towards said metric or whatever that may be. And oftentimes, the people who I've seen be less celebrated in the tech space are those who may ultimately be doing a lot of work and working very hard and diligently, but they're not making a convincing argument that they are moving said needle. And so I think that is something that I quickly learned in the various organizations that I've worked across is there can be a lot of ambiguity and change, but I think you have to read between the lines and understand what needs to happen and advocate for yourself and let's say market yourself. But in
There's
many
some
ways,
truth
you
to
have
that.
to you really have to put yourself out there that you are making a difference for this organization.
Tech can sometimes attract neurodivergent individuals because sometimes you're celebrated, incentivized, and compensated for being a very narrowly focused subject matter expert in your tech stack, your space, your discipline. And so talked last week about your neurodivergence. You find yourself in tech. Tell me about your experience with other people in the tech space in terms of did you observe or see people that you're like, I wonder if they might be neurodivergent as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why once I found the role that I found, I felt so comfortable and happy because it felt like I finally found a place where I, for lack of a better term, I didn't feel like I stood out. I didn't feel different. In fact, I felt celebrated to be who I was at many times. Yeah, I think that I would agree with your assessment there.
I'll say, I mean, I worked in tech for 10, 11 years at this point, and it is remarkable the concentration of the neurodivergent population within tech. It makes sense. Again, you want the world leading expert on Heroku or AWS or whatnot, right, to solve that problem. And I think that there's more grace afforded to people that are atypical. Maybe they lack those social skills that really would cause someone to maybe flourish in a law firm relative to a tech firm. And so it's been interesting to spend so much time in the space and then again see so many like-minded people and again feel that sense of belonging, just like you said. I'm curious, when it came to leadership, did you feel supported as a neurodivergent person?
Yeah, I would say it was very hit or miss. And the reason why I say that is I felt like yeah, amongst my peers and even amongst leadership, it definitely felt like my personality could shine in the way that I always wanted it to. I could feel very comfortable to be myself. during meetings and really didn't feel like I had to mask or do whatever I've previously done at other jobs. And that just may have been from the remote nature of it. I'd have to think more longer about that. But at the same time, too, I'd also, over the last few years, have seen people who identify as neurodivergent really be penalized for very like direct feedback or advanced in the same ways that I thought that they might have been in comparison to their peers. And so I think that, like you said, there's a lot of organizations or there's a lot of tech organizations that have a high level of employees uh, that are neurodivergent, but I'm not entirely sure that organizations have ultimately understood the resources and the support that those employees might need.
No, I think that's fair. You said, again, higher population, and maybe they're not employing or creating resources for said individuals. If you had a magic wand, that's one of my favorite questions to ask in customer research. If you had a magic wand, what advice would you give to executives that desire to be more inclusive, more equitable for a diverse group of people that are working within their org?
Yeah, I think it's really sitting down with every employee. Obviously, it depends upon the scale of your organization, but ensuring that all managers are sitting down with their employees and really understanding how this person prefers to be communicated with, celebrated, given feedback, how even in the onboarding process, I feel like I do not learn in the same way that or I do not learn in a way that I think matches or mirrors a lot of onboarding programs, which is here, come in and read all this documentation. That does not work for me. I don't retain that information as well. And so I have definitely been in organizations where I've given that feedback and said, like, is can we sit down and can you walk me through this and show me what I need to be doing? Because I'm reading the documentation and it's not clicking for me. So really like from the very beginning, working with the people that will be working for you to really understand what do they need? Again, how do they intake information? How do they prefer to receive criticism? What you as their manager can do to support them and make space for those tough conversations if need be in a way that feels that yeah, that feels safe, that feels supportive. And uh, I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think that a lot of times there's these articles and these videos about here's how you do XYZ in terms of management. And I just don't truly believe there is a one size fits all, regardless of your employees, whether they're on the spectrum or not, neurodivergent or not, have a learning disability. Like there it doesn't matter. There you cannot just apply the same treatment across the board. Everybody needs something a little bit different. And it's, I think, your responsibility as a manager or as a leader of the company to ensure that's happening.
I do think it is interesting that a lot of business facing articles talk about the differences between generations, and those are hyper relevant. What I think is interesting based off what you just said is we don't have enough content out there, in my opinion, about difference in learning styles, the visual, the auditory, doing it yourself, right? Hands-on learner. And so we sometimes get anchored into like, well, Gen X, millennials do this or boomers do this. And I think not often enough do we talk about the difference and the diversity of learning styles, whether you're on the spectrum, off the spectrum, neurodivergent or not, right? We all have a different way of processing information. Darci, I wonder, have you found that being neurodivergent has ever cost you in your career in a meaningful way?
Yeah, I think absolutely. If you listen to the last episode, you'll understand that social skills and feeling a sense of belonging is something that I really was missing my entire life. And upon joining the very first organization that I worked at in tech, it was a space of everyone's welcome and, we're all in this together and really preaching the sense of family. And I quickly latched onto that because I was so desperate to have that in my life and was so eh, happy to find a place where I felt like I belonged and was working with peers who I could identify with. And in doing that, I took on the company's mission as my mission in life. And I think we talked a lot about, I think in the last episode, we talked about searching for my identity. And that was the first lesson that I learned in tech. The hard lesson to learn in tech was not having my job become my identity, because this was the first time in a job where I was really proud, really truly proud of what I was doing, excited to clock in, making more serious money. I just felt like everything was finally clicking into place. Um, and as a result of that, I started working long hours. I, was not disconnecting from Slack in the evenings, on the weekends. I was always really there because it was that instant gratification of like, I am good at this job. I am making a difference here. I'm getting that positive feedback. I feel comfortable here. I feel safe here. And that quickly turned into a slippery slope where I was not disconnecting from the job. I was not different from my job. My identity and self-worth became entangled in that job. And that led me on a path towards, as you're aware, something that can really happen in tech, which is significant burnout.
And so tell me about, what did burnout look like in your personal life, right? So you're showing up at all hours for your job, you're checking those Slack notifications late at night, you're crushing it at work. What was the personal cost?
Yeah, I mean, it was far reaching, to be honest. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning from stress. I started isolating myself from my friends and family, not feeling really just exhausted at the end of the day and not taking the time or feeling like I had the energy to reach out to loved ones, dialing back on my hobbies. This perfectly partnered with the COVID pandemic of also being isolated there as well. And so we're not leaving the house, which makes it even easier to work even more so. And there's nothing to do. So I'm stressed. I'm not sleeping, not having something to release that stress in or stress with, because I'm just stuck in my house. And because I'm stressed, something that I have dealt with my whole life is, turning to food as a source of comfort and eating more and becoming more unhealthy, gaining weight. And in my marriage, my husband ultimately suffered through this experience because the distance between us grew. He felt like he was losing me and who I was to the job, not making time for him and making him feel like a priority. And so it ultimately came to a head where we talked about last time about how depression and anxiety is something that I've dealt with my entire life. And this was probably, what was this, 20, I think this was 20, maybe 2021, again, just in the middle of the COVID pandemic. And I was so unhappy, but I couldn't stop. I did not know how to break this cycle of working constantly and being there for this company that's given me a chance to break into tech and to learn these new skills that ultimately every single day I woke up more and more unhappy and further into this cycle that I could not break out of. And it came to a head because I started having thoughts of suicide, which I had not had for quite a period in my life. And I really felt like I had come to a place where I'd put that behind me. And then it came roaring back during this period. And ultimately, there was a lot of hard conversations with friends and family who reached out to me to say that they were really concerned about my mental health. My husband coming to me and saying, I don't know who you are anymore. And it feels like you're choosing this job over me. You're choosing this job over us. And me feeling like, but I can't leave. How could I leave? This is the job that I've been the most successful in. This is the job that has given me so much, has given me a safe space to really feel that sense of belonging, to really thrive and excel and exceed. And so what ultimately ended up happening is I ended up reaching out to somebody in the leadership team and really explained the situation and said, like, I just had this aha moment where I realized this is not going to change. Like, I don't know how to put up boundaries here. Like, I had I knew all the knowledge, right? Like set up boundaries and like disconnect from Slack and delete it off your phone and take care of your mental health. And I was hearing all of those things from leadership, but I did not know how to implement it. And so I reached out to our leadership and said, like, I am personally really struggling. My husband and I are on the verge of divorce. I've been dealing with infertility for the last 10 years and it's coming to a head. And I'm also dealing with suicidal thoughts. And I just need to press pause. Is there any way that I could take an extended leave of absence to go get help, get myself a little bit in a healthier place and come back to work with a new outlet and maybe have learned how to implement some of those things. I was fortunate enough that they did give me 30 days to take a step back. It was not, 30 days goes by like that. It was not enough time to ultimately do the hearing. And after a lot of hard discussions with myself and my husband, we realized that I needed to remove myself from that position, from that job in that organization, because I did not think that I could go back and ultimately be the healthier version of myself in that workspace.
I'd love to take a moment and loop back to that 30-day window where you step back from the business, right? You ask for help. They say, yes, like step away for about 4 weeks time. Maybe someone is hearing this, right? And they're in a similar headspace, but they haven't asked for that time off. How did you spend your 30 days? What did healing reflection look like as you took that step back from the tech company?
Yeah, it was one, not thinking it did not open my laptop. I did not open Slack. Like I completely disconnected. And it was just ultimately remembering who I was pre this job, pre the pandemic. What made me happy? What makes me happy? Is it really this job? Or is it that sense of belonging that I had in this job? Or the fact that I was good at my job? Thinking about again, what do I really need? And I read a lot of books. I think finding that time period where really just chasing joy and trying to bring myself out of this negative cycle where I was spiraling down. And so, yeah, it was just a lot of that, a lot of listening to music and spending times outside in the sunshine and calling friends and family, traveling and just doing whatever I could to find to break that cycle.
At the conclusion of your 4 weeks, what happened?
Ultimately, made the decision to quit and to move on to a different job opportunity, ultimately doing the same or similar role. But I found that with a new organization, it was a fresh opportunity to take those hard lessons that I learned and apply them elsewhere and really test to see if my hearing was effective. And I came into it with a fresh sense of this is a company. They are not my family. They are not my friends. We can be friendly, but we have some boundaries. And I'm going to do what is in my job description. I'm not here to save the day and go above and beyond. And if this company doesn't get their Series C, it's not my fault. It's not my responsibility. And what is happening outside of work is just as, or even more so important to me moving forward. And I'm very proud of myself because I did almost have that 180 experience. And I know that you, as my friend, you saw that as well of really just setting up those healthy boundaries and really understanding that you can be healthy. There are healthy tech organizations out there, that there are managers out there who will rise to the occasion, who will hear what you need from you and help you out in those situations. And so my next motivation in life is to really ensure that nobody else finds themselves in a similar situation, because I think it's very easy to do, even though that was like a storm of perfect events where you had a pandemic and a lot of like key things going on in my personal life. But I think that it, it I know a lot of people who work in tech who are experiencing the same burnout, depression, overworking, exhaustion in my own personal life. And I feel very fortunate that I can use my experience to reach out to them and say, hey, are you happy? Is there anything you can do? Can you talk to your managers? Can you talk to your leadership and advocate for yourself now before it gets to the point that my experience got to?
Thank you for sharing that story. You had stated that the best advice you had ever received was you cannot heal in the place that hurt you. Tell us a little bit more about that.
I don't think that's true for everybody. In fact, I know it's not, because I know that you've been in an environment where it did the hard work and it really tried to heal in a place that was not working for you. So it's not true for everybody, but for me, it felt like I couldn't take those lessons and apply them in that same sandbox that was teaching me those lessons. I needed a fresh set of players. I wear my heart on my sleeve and a lot of times, and I felt really deep personal connections with a lot of my coworkers. And it was akin to climbing Mount Everest, I think, to put up those personal boundaries retroactively. And so it's much easier to move on and take those lessons elsewhere.
A metaphor that comes to my mind in your saying that is it's almost like dying in a video game and you get to retry a level of like, okay, well, this did not work, right? I went this way and I didn't check ahead or whatnot. I didn't check the map, right? And you die inside video game, but then you respawn and you get to start with the wisdom of what didn't work in that new life at that new company. And it sounds like that's what you did. That's what you carried forward into the next place.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that ultimately there was a lot of regret that came from that experience, because at that time I'd been with that company for 4 years and really did love that job, loved the work, loved the people. But I think it's a lot of times in product talk about like radically prioritizing stuff. And I think that I got to a point where it's like, I am not radically prioritizing my happiness. I'm not radically prioritizing my marriage. And knowing what I know now, can I do this in this environment? Because the players have not changed. They are aware. They now have additional information about what is going on with me and the situation. But like organizationally, the structure hasn't changed. We haven't hired anybody to reduce my workload. Like nothing has shifted. That ultimately means that the calculus has changed. And so knowing that, it I felt like going back would be ignoring all of the hard lessons that I'd learned, and that it was a safer bet to bet on myself, to say, I have learned these hard lessons. I can go apply them elsewhere and be just as successful. I am talented. I will find another job that I can do and excel and thrive in. I will find another set of coworkers that like me for the way that I am and the way that my brain works. And yeah, can get that fresh start by betting on myself, recognizing that nothing had changed within that first organization to believe that pattern wouldn't repeat again.
But you mentioned I can make new friends again. I think there's also this question of will the people that I'm friends with at company A, will I be able to carry them forward? Will I still be
Mhm.
friends with some of these people? And we have been in touch in the years that have followed your departure from said business. And so it's always interesting to know who carries forward because sometimes there is that fear, right? Of like, this is my family, this is my startup group. There's a culture of like, well, this hyper loyalty, even if it's at your own personal expense. And so sometimes, like, the bravest thing is to radically prioritize yourself.
Yeah. And I think we often joke that I say this a lot, but like there's no bond stronger than the trauma bond. And I think that lesson was learned in that first organization. And that's why I still maintained my personal relationship with a lot of folks from that organization. but every organization I've been in. That sense, there's there is a divide. There's an intentional divide between myself and my coworkers to protect myself and really ensure that there is no bonding over trauma, because I will not only protect myself from being in a work environment that results in the same situation, but also I will advocate for those around me to ensure that that cycle is not repeated.
So you go from company A into company B. You carry lessons and the hard fought wisdom from company A into B. What ended up happening with company B?
It was honestly, it was great. So at company B, it was a really great, profound experience for me. I had an incredible manager who had a lot of trust in me to do what needed to happen. And it- his philosophy, although I don't think he said this in these exact words, but like his philosophy was more or less just like make one thing better each day. I mean, if you make one thing better at this company each day, however big or however small, then then we're very lucky and fortunate to have you. And really, really healing to be at that organization because I felt like I was making a difference, but I wasn't sacrificing myself and my marriage for it. I ultimately was too short lived. The company did do some restructuring and the great layoffs of what year is it? 2023. I was unfortunately let go or laid off. So, but I still am incredibly grateful for that organization because it taught me what a healthy tech environment could look like.
What did you do after the layoff happened? How did you reset after that moment?
Yeah, I think it was another moment of ensuring that I stayed on the path that I was on of healing. Healing from burnout can take twice as long as your burnout period. And I think that's what I ultimately recognized was that those 30 days off that company A had offered me, joining company B, like it wasn't like I was healed and ready to go back to work. That burnout was there, but I was actively monitoring and ensuring that I was constantly checking in with myself and my manager about where I was at. And so in the layoff, this is an incredible opportunity for me to continue to heal as well and get myself back out there interviewing and really just trying to find, once again, another organization that is a safe place to work as somebody who went through like an extreme version of burnout. And once again, it was an opportunity to go into a company with eyes wide open.
I wonder, how would you describe your marriage today by contrast?
Oh, amazing. My husband is my best friend. And during my time period with company B, I feel like we need a diagram here. Like my work experience. But during my time at company B, there was like a light bulb moment because my husband sat down with me one day and said, like, I feel like I have my life back. And I felt like, wow. So you mean I can have the career and the healthy marriage? And I think too often it feels like you have to choose, right? Like, do you want to be a career person or do you want to be a family person? And it was really a light bulb experience to hear that from him of like, I don't have to choose. I can be a career person and have this really rewarding life in my house at home. So
I have to imagine that anyone listening to that sentence of like, you could have both, it really is possible to remain in tech, to maintain yourself in light of the lessons of the past. What advice might you offer to someone that's in that dark, difficult place? And what you just shared sounds like a pipe dream to them.
you have to make space and time into you have to be very intentional about your efforts outside of work of again setting up that personal identity separate from work that you have to invest. If you want to be a family person, you have to invest in your family. So finding new and novel, interesting things to do to connect with the people that you love, have those hard conversations, constantly check in with one another. Uh, if my husband and I, before the work week on, every Sunday night, part of processing the Sunday scary is what is on your agenda this week? What can I take from you? What do we want to do for ourselves? And really like think about, okay, well, on Thursday, we're going to go to this restaurant that we're really excited about. And let's look at the menu and think about what we're going to order and just find reasons to celebrate life and each other outside of work. And it doesn't happen by accident. You have to do the work, and you also have to protect yourself and your loved ones by asking for help and being fully transparent. And I don't know what would have happened in my situation if I didn't have that network of loved ones who were checking up on me, who did notice a difference. And I think that's why there's this concept of people who commit self harm and suicide. I think that there is this concept of, I didn't know. No, nobody knew. And it's because people are really good at covering and hiding how truly lost and sad they are. And I don't think I was one of those people. I think it was very fortunate that I was very I think my signs and symptoms of depression were obvious enough that my friends and family noticed, but that's not the case for everybody. And so if you have loved ones in your life, you have to tell them what to be on the lookout for and how they can help you if they do have those worries and concerns. And I have told my friends and family now that if they see me repeating the same behaviors, to please hold an intervention. Like, please stop me from getting to such a bad place again. And they are committed to doing that. And I feel very committed to doing the same thing for them as well.
Yeah, I mean, what a beautiful story. What a difficult, story arc to walk through in all of that. But I'm just so glad that you're in a better place. And to watch that transformation firsthand has been truly remarkable. I'm just so proud of how you have continued to just dig deep and just pursue forward, right? And just continue to like submit to the process of healing and reconstruct who you are outside of the workspace. And yeah, and the fantastic neighbor and friend and wife that you really are.
Oh, well, thank you, Kelsey. And you may not want me saying this, but so you are one of those people that did reach out to me. And you did make me honest with myself and where I was at. And you've been so successful in your own career that I knew that knowing you, I knew that I would be okay because you had a lot of good career advice for me of like how to ensure that didn't happen again. You yourself have been a manager of others and you shared your thoughts and lessons as a manager of how to stop that from happening for people as well. So there are a lot of lessons there with being your friend.
I love you, Darcy. One thing I
I
do want to talk about is I want to talk about like the world's scorecard and building your own personal scorecard. Review season comes around maybe once a year or twice a year at given companies, and you are graded on a 1 to 5 scale, depending on the company. But something you and I have talked about extensively, and I think the audience should get a little peek into, is this idea of cultivating and crafting your own scorecard for what health and happiness and like doing well actually looks like. Once upon a time, you told me about your introduction, I think, to some women in your neighborhood. And they were like, "What do you do, Darcy?" And this is a period when you were laid off. Tell me about how you reconstructed what success looked like, rewriting your identity in that time when you were laid off.
Yeah, that did happen. There was a several month period where I was laid off and people come up to me and say, "Oh, what do you do?" And I would say, absolutely anything but work. Basically, like whatever, insert insert activity.
I'm a housewife. I'm a dog mom. I think I bake bread. There were a variety of things.
Yeah, I bake bread. I make cookies for like whatever, insert whatever thing that day that I did. That was generally my answer. And it was because, again, I was working to remove that identity as I am a product operations person. Like, that is me through and through. Do you want to talk about Gantt charts and racing matrices? Like, no, that's not who I am. I am much more interesting and well rounded than that. So I completely forgot what your question was, though.
How did you ultimately end up building like a scorecard for life? What I
Okay.
mean by that is so often all of us get swept up in the rat race, whether it be what are we earning this year? What is our title? What was our last performance review score on a 1 to 5 scale? Right? When you're laid off and you're removed from the rat race, it becomes this moment where you have the opportunity to say, like, well, what does success actually look like if I'm not making X dollars or I'm not at Y fancy company?
Yeah. And I think that has been a part of this healing process of identifying what that scorecard looks like. And so a lot of it was conversations with my husband. It was, I want to being successful to me means having a happy, healthy marriage. It was, I want to be a good friend and family member who reaches out to my best friends at least once a week. I want to be a kind human to my body. So I'm going to eat a leafy green once a day, if I call it at the very least. And I think it was, I want to be a member of my community. So I'm going to volunteer at XYZ neighborhood event. And really just think about all the things where I could show up for those in the loved ones in my life or my community members and think about those as like, I talk about like an action item of like, so and so will do X by this period, right? Like make those action items for your life. Like Darcy will do this by this date. And that equates to like, I can check that off my list. And so for me, that was it was a very a proactive activity. Knowing what I know now, I was being far too reactive to life. And instead, I have set the scorecard. I define what success is. I will constantly check in with myself and my loved ones, and I will make these commitments. Whether you write them down or not, it can just be like something you keep inside your heart, but I will dictate what that is. And that's fine if it is, I will make this much money. I will ship 3 features. Like that's totally fine if that is what brings you happiness and joy. But you need to understand what your scorecard looks like. And it may not look like what society tells you your scorecard should look like, but you need to not be, you need to be emphatically over the top and defensive of your scorecard.
And something we've talked about at length is this idea that when it comes to that personal scorecard for life, you can't sell or market real happiness, joy, peace, a good marriage. Like it's hard to represent that on Instagram effectively. And yet, like, you know whether or not your marriage is doing well. And so often we get swept up in designer products or this many vacations in a given year because, like, you can photograph that, you can capture it, you can spend money on it, and it can be acquired. And yet, having peace with the person that you see in the mirror or the person that you're sharing your life with or the friend that you are to others, I think it's what makes it so hard to actually value that personal scorecard because you can't like want a healthy marriage. I mean, I guess you could talk about like how happy you and David are, but it's much harder to do versus like, I am this title at this company or I drive this
Yeah.
car. And I think that's something you and I have talked about at length. And we found like a lot of joy and peace by really focusing on like what's that personal scorecard relative to like what the world is always pushing and pressing upon us.
Yeah, I think that's completely true. I think that there's a reason why there's an expression of like keeping up with the Smiths or whatever.
Joneses, yeah.
Joneses, there's a reason why that exists. And I think that there's I think it's really easy to get yourself in a place where you compare yourself to others, but that is the very first place where you will find unhappiness. And I really caution people to compare yourself to who you were 1 year ago, 2 years ago, because that should be your metric of success. Am I better than I was before? Or maybe not better, but am I happy? Am I as happy? Even having the same exact, like I am maintaining this level of happiness in my life and joy, then that is also fine. But am I doing better than Kelsey? Like, no, you cannot do that. It will tear you apart the second you involve comparing yourself to others. And so I think there's a natural thing that happens, particular to women, like this phenomenon. There's this thing that like women, as they approach their 40s, they become like more self-confident, more self-assured, happier. And I think a lot of it just has to do like you have learned all of these hard lessons and you get to that point where you are using your own personal scorecard or where you're emphatically chasing your own joy. And maybe it's like the realization that you're entering the second half of your life that you want it to look very differently than your first. I'm not entirely sure, but I've seen this in my own friends and family as well. Like that process of aging is really like it can be a really joyful experience because you have learned all of these lessons. You can confidently just be more of yourself and define your own personal success as you age. I think that's something that happens. And I certainly feel like I'm on the same journey.
I feel like we're both like old ladies in our spirits. Like just that we have old souls in terms of like some of the things older people figure out. We've run into some of those brick walls at a younger age, and it's worth distinguishing the rate at which you learn those things, but it is also worth highlighting that everyone is on their own journey, and success and healing and health is going to look radically different from one person to another. And yet we are always comparing and contrasting our lives to someone else. And as you said, that is a recipe for misery that I too have fallen prey to far too many times. So as we look to wrap up our time together, sounds like a couple of the key lessons, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Darcy. It sounds like this commitment to continue to pivot, which was last episode. Second is setting boundaries and raising your hand, asking for help. And then three is redefining what winning and success ultimately looks like. Any other lessons that you want to highlight before we wrap up our time?
Just be emphatically you. There's only one you. There's only one. That's very like cliche, but like you truly do just have one life. And I spend a lot of time thinking about preventing myself getting from a place where I'm on my deathbed feeling regrets and recognizing that time is now if I want to stop and change that. Oftentimes it's really easy to fall into this trap that you want other people to take better care of you than you take care of yourself. And that includes a company and its leadership as well. And that's what I learned with that first tech company that I worked at is I wanted them to see how much I was struggling. I wanted them to intervene and save the day because I didn't have the skills to advocate for myself and put up boundaries and do what I needed. And that is the hard lesson is that you have to take care of yourself and nobody will take care of yourself better than you can take care of yourself if you do the work. And so whether it's in a job or a relationship, you have to advocate for your needs.
Well, that sounds like a perfect summary of our conversation today. Darcy, thank you so much for telling us about this second part of your more recent career in tech and navigating burnout, pursuing healing, and ultimately finding peace. As we wrap things up, it was a heavy conversation. And if you know someone that might benefit from hearing Darcy's story, I would encourage you to forward it, drop it in a text message. Say, hey, I thought of you. This made me think of how you're struggling with burnout, or maybe you are the burnt out person. I want you to know that there is hope for a better future when it comes to burnout. I too have struggled with seasons, years of navigating burnout and trying to find joy again. It is not an easy road. It is not a short road, but I know that it's a road worth pursuing. But sometimes people do give up, and I want that to not be your story. Next week, I'm going to be connecting with my dear friend Ben, and we're going to talk about being a software engineer and being neurodivergent and a whole slew of things. I don't even know what we're going to talk about, but I know it'll be great. And so please stay tuned. That'll drop next Tuesday. And until then, be well.